Hi everyone. Welcome to the people here and the people remotely around the world, maybe. My name is Yaron Koren. I'll be the moderator for this panel about MediaWiki administration. And I think it's a more exciting topic than it sounds.
I'm excited.
Hopefully it won't get into the really technical aspects of which local settings variables to use and so forth. But let's see what happens. So here's the panel. If you could, I guess starting with Jeffrey, if you could say your name and why you deserve to be speaking on a panel on such an important topic.
My name is Jeffrey Wang, and so I'm the founder and CEO of MyWikis, which is a wiki host, and we host hundreds of wikis using MediaWiki. So MyWikis started, over 11 years ago, and I started my, career in MediaWiki as an administrator, right? I had to learn, how to create a MediaWiki instance, how to administer it via local settings, and then slowly my role progressed to how can we scale this to, more wikis? How do I help other wiki owners be able to do that? So my experience with administration has been actually a core component of what I do with MediaWiki. It's really how I fell in love with the software as well. So I'm excited to share some of the insights I've gained over the past 12, 13 years. Yeah.
Great.
I'm Cindy Cicalese. I am a principal engineer at the Wikimedia Foundation. And I've been at the foundation for almost 6 years. And prior to that, for 10 years, I worked at MITRE Corporation. And there I maintained several wiki farms. And found that it was challenging to keep them updated, to deploy new software versions, to make sure that we were actually running consistent versions of software across the various different wiki farms, from development to staging to production. And some scripts in Ansible to manage deploying across wiki farms and keeping things updated. I then found out that at NASA, they were using Ansible for their Mesa infrastructure. So about the time I left MITRE and joined the foundation, I gave them some feedback based on things that were best practices that I learned over using Ansible to manage my wiki farms. I now maintain a very small wiki farm for basically my own personal use on Wikimedia Cloud Services. And am usually a little up with the versions because, shoemakers, children, whatever. So I try to keep it updated. I have become enamored of Docker-based solutions and also frustrated with Docker-based solutions to maintaining software. And I would love to see a future where there is more standardization in how people deploy wiki farms and keep them updated. And I think it would do wonders for the market reach of MediaWiki as a platform if it were easier for people to keep it updated and installed.
Hi, I'm Brian Wolff. I work for Wikitech, which is a MediaWiki consulting firm. Previously, I used to work for the Wikimedia Foundation on the security team. I've been around MediaWiki for quite a long time now as a developer. And I'm happy to be here and talk about MediaWiki administrative stuff.
Cool. Hello, my name is Ryan Schmidt. I'm an independent contractor, I guess. I've been working with MediaWiki since 2007, first as a developer, having written quite a few extensions. Then I helped launch a wiki farm called ShellWiki, although I did not stay with them for very long. And these days I do contract as well as managed MediaWiki hosting for a handful of clients.
Cool. Great. I feel like we've learned a lot about MediaWiki administration already just from those introductions. But, well, so here's the first question. I'll throw it out. I don't. But okay, so a friend of yours comes to you and says, "I've just created my own micronation. I've done all the work. I just wrote the anthem, but now I want to make a wiki for it. So what would you recommend to them to do, and what pitfalls would you tell them to watch out for?"
I guess I can start with that one.
Sure.
First thing to do is, you need a platform to run it on. So you need a web server, you need a database server. Always best to stick with what's well known and well tested. So I would recommend Apache and MySQL. Beyond that, the installation guide on MediaWiki.org is pretty comprehensive, a little bit hard to follow at times, but if you do go step by step, it gives you a pretty good default install.
I guess I'll add on to that. So I'd probably first take a step back and ask some kind of product management type questions. And like, just based on a prompt, there's a lot of different things in different situations call for different things. So it depends, is this person a technical person? Do they want to host it themselves? Do they want to pay someone to host it themselves? Do they have the knowledge to host it themselves? Depending on that, there's different options they can take. Like maybe they are a technical person and wants to have the fun of hosting themselves. There's a lot of kind of self-service stuff they can do. But maybe it's not their knowledge area, or maybe it is, and they just have other more important things they want to work on. Running a micronation is hard. So maybe they want to hire someone. Maybe they want to use plots. Marahese is a pretty well-known one right now. And then if I was helping them run it, I guess would also ask about what exactly they want to use the wiki for, and who is the people that are going to edit it. Because depending on the answers, you need different things, different extensions, different skins, different setup to best meet the needs of whoever the target audience is. So I guess to conclude, it depends.
I guess I would have said a lot of the same things. I guess in the taking this a step back category, since we've defined this as a micro nation, I'm assuming it does not have sufficient reach to qualify for being a Wikimedia. At some point, it will transition from being a micronation to what would be one step above? I don't know, something, or an actual nation, and would have sufficient reach. So the first thing is, okay, so it's probably not an actual Wikimedia property. So then I would, go through the same thought process. Is it something that you want to manage yourself, or would you like somebody else to host it for you? And I think that's the very first question that you need to ask.
I would just say go to mywikis.com and pay. But in all seriousness, yes. So as the rest of the panelists have said, it really depends on the situation. But another, I think, suggestion I would offer is if you really do want to host yourself. I know there's been discussions, Ansible, Docker, etc. Running a micronation must be a very busy task, and so if you want to try out a solution like Canasta, that would help, I think, a lot. But I think one of the biggest benefits of Canasta is that, a micronation is going to have a lot of specific page content that is going to follow a certain structure. And if other people have already built that structure, then you want to use existing, info boxes and other, content templates to kind of facilitate what you're looking for. So In that sense, I think Canasta is actually going to be a good option because you can import pages, you can use the page exchange extension, which Yaron helped develop, to import packages of pages, and that would make it significantly easier to import. But this is a really much you have to do and can do. These are just a few, pickings of what is going to be involved with doing the legwork. Choosing extensions, choosing the info boxes, modifying it, maybe creating custom skin, a lot of things.
Cool. Okay, this is my second, hopefully last dumb question. So a month later, your friend comes to you and says, thanks for helping me, giving me that advice. Things are going great. Everybody wants to join my micronation. The problem is the wiki's just getting overrun. It's getting like 1 million hits a day, and it's super slow, and I don't know what to do. Maybe it's my cool anthem that I made, but. So what advice would you give to the person at that point?
I'd have them talk to Brian
Yeah,
because
I'd have them watch my presentation that's happening tomorrow.
Okay, cool.
Where I present on this topic. To actually answer the question though, so there's a number of things. First and foremost, it's always important to measure so it is very easy to try and fix the wrong thing and waste a lot of time doing that. So it's important to understand what your traffic patterns are, which part is actually the slow part of your site, and optimize that. In the description given, where you have a lot of people visiting your site, reading it, they're probably not logged in. The most typical and solution to that sort of thing is a CDN caching layer. In the MediaWiki world, that is usually Varnish, is the traditional option. Setting that up kind of is a layer where it answers website requests that are repetitive, that it's seen before, so that your more complicated backend has some breathing room, and Varnish answers all the requests that are identical to the ones that came before. And that can really help if you have a wiki where you have a smaller number of editors that actually edit it and a large number of users that just view it. Wikipedia being the typical example where the number of people who read it far exceeds the number of people who edit it. So that's probably where I'd start. Does anyone else want to chime in?
Sure, I can chip in as well. Varnish is great when your site follows that pattern and you have mostly static pages. If you have a lot of dynamic content on your site where you want fresh data given to every visitor, perhaps a front-end cache CDN layer is not the right choice. Your server is getting overloaded. I think there's two things to look at. One is, do you actually need all that dynamic content on your site? If you can reduce that, or if you're okay with, say, maybe updating it once a day instead of on every page load, then you can go ahead and use Varnish or Nginx or whatever caching proxy you would like to use. Second is, if you do need that, then you're probably looking at either scaling up or scaling out. Exactly what that looks like will depend on your exact setup. If you're with a wiki farm, they probably already have something to accommodate that. If not, you may need to move off that farm. If you're hosting it yourself, it'll largely depend on how your platform is set up.
Here's some great points made. Cindy, do you want to chime in?
Sure. So I would say one other usage pattern I would advise them is major announcements, be aware of spikes. The story that I'll tell is we were deploying a new wiki at MITRE, and a lot of care was given into how they were going to announce this new wiki, except they didn't think about what was going to happen when the announcement was made. And it was going to be sent out, but got sent out prematurely. And an email went to 6,000 employees with a link saying, hey, this great new feature is available, go here. And pretty much 6,000 or maybe 3,000 employees all clicked the link at exactly the same time and immediately killed the site. Dead. So we did not have, we wound up going to a after that to help, adapt to spikes, but I would also give quite a bit of thought that if they're going to announce an update to their national anthem, or maybe, some, they would knight somebody and, everybody was going to be very excited, have a coronation. Probably they want to be very careful with how they announce it and not email all of the citizens of the micronation at the same time and have them click on a link that will kill the wiki.
But yeah, so awesome points made so far. Just to back up a little bit, I think a lot of, do-it-yourself MediaWiki administrators are going to choose like a shared hosting website. And at this point, if you're at the point where you're getting millions of page views per month, or even millions of page views per day, it might not be enough to handle it. So at that point, on this that were mentioned here, like Varnish, Squid, changing the dynamic content, to something different. I would recommend basically getting off of that and looking into solutions where you can manage more of it. I know that getting your own server and configuring all of these things is difficult. So there's a few approaches you can take with this. One is you can move to like a Docker-based solutions like Canasta. But the issue is, running on Docker can be quite expensive, and it's going to require a lot of resources compared to running on shared hosting. But then again, you have a lot more users now, so there's not really anything you can do about it other than you do have to scale up on resources. It's just that what do you call it? Docker itself can have a lot of administrative overhead because it controls containers. So another approach you could take instead is to like use a cloud service, right? So like AWS or Azure. You could use like a cloud MySQL managed instance. It's a SaaS product, right? You could also try running your wikis on instead of like running it on a VM, you could try running it on like a
bare metal.
No, not really, but because for a cloud, probably more like a container-based solution. So like on Azure, it'd be like Azure container instances, things like that. Later today, there'll be a presentation about how Microsoft, runs it, and we're gonna talk about how they use something a little different on Azure. But yeah, the key here is that there's a lot of ways to scale out and scale up, and it'll definitely have to involve getting out of that shared hosting mindset and just being able to apply all these different technologies like Varnish and things like that. But I think given that this the micronation probably has a lot of other things to do, I would probably recommend the Docker solution, like using Canasta, to be like the most time-effective solution. Whereas if you really want to optimize for it and you can control your cloud spending, then probably going for like Azure.
Yeah. Just briefly, Ryan, you said you were talking about. You explain what that means in this context, like what makes something.
Sure. Yeah. So in MediaWiki itself has a number of built-in caching layers to help reduce burden from the back end. One of these is called the parser cache. Normally, when you edit a page, it will to the final HTML, and every subsequent view for at least a little while will be served that cached HTML version instead of having to reparse the page in every view. There are a number of extensions that let you do dynamic queries, semantic MediaWiki, cargo, dynamic page list, as well as various extensions that will let you tweak the page based on the current user viewing the page, which sometimes will disable, or you might want to disable the parser cache for that in order so that every time you view the page, it'll rerun those queries, figure out who the current user is to be able to dynamically adjust the page content. However, this means you're now doing a lot more work on the web server for every time you view the wiki.
Yeah, okay. Cool. So one current and one former Wikimedia Foundation employee. This is always a topic of conversation. You know, what's the Wikimedia Foundation done for us lately, and are they doing enough? Are they doing too much? Or for them, it's are we doing too much? I suppose. What are people's thoughts? I don't know if we should go in order again, but what are people's thoughts about the Wikimedia Foundation's support for third-party MediaWiki administrators? Maybe we'll just go starting with Jeffrey again in order, I guess.
Actually, you can start with Brian.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, Brian, go ahead.
Okay.
Or Brian. Sorry, go ahead, Brian. Sorry, you're clearly.
Sure. Kind of a bit of a loaded question in a sense.
Sure is.
It is what you want from them. Obviously, it is not the use case that is top of mind at Wikimedia. I mean, I haven't worked there for quite a few years, so I can't speak to what is currently happening, although I'm sure Cindy can talk about that. And I have heard that there's kind of more thoughts about the third-party use case recently than there were in the past. But ultimately, Wikimedia Foundation is going to always primarily be focused on hosting Wikipedia. And that's not going to change simply. And quite frankly, nor should it. Like, they have a job to do. And they can't solely think about like third-party hosting. Although I do think it's something that is like thought about from time to time, and having third parties be able to use MediaWiki is a helpful thing. So generally speaking, I think most of the effort is more on the trying not to be in the way rather than trying to help. And I mean, like not making sure not to intentionally break things. Ultimately, though, if you're an external host of MediaWiki, like part of that means that you're responsible for your own wiki and no one else's, including the Wikimedia Foundation. And if you have unique problems, you have to find unique solutions on your own. And I mean, I think that's pretty fair. Like, you know, when you do your own thing, you have to do your own thing, costs and benefits. Yeah, that's kind of just my general impression. As I said, I used to work at the Wikimedia Foundation, but that was like, things change. I can't really talk to the current state of things. But yeah, Cindy, do you want to go ahead?
But I sort of can.
Yes.
So I guess there are 3 points I want to make. The first being, when I made my transition from outside the foundation to inside the foundation, it was learning something about the Wikimedia infrastructure for running MediaWiki. I was really struck at the difference between how MediaWiki was run on the Wikimedia infrastructure from how we ran it at MITRE, how I knew that NASA was running it, how I knew how other hosts were running it, and was struck really by the difference in how it was deployed and by necessity, the layers of caching to run at Wikipedia scale it's intense, and it's not necessary in many third-party MediaWiki installs and would be overkill and too difficult to maintain. So there really is a fundamental difference in how the software can and should be run. And it's not the job of the Wikimedia Foundation, nor is it the area of expertise, I would say, of the Wikimedia Foundation to know and develop how third parties run the software. So I think it is important, that's what these conferences are helpful for. That's what many of the meetings, we've got the monthly meeting of the MediaWiki stakeholder group where people come and give advice to each other. I think it's important for the third-party MediaWiki community to come together and to share and document best practices for the deployment of MediaWiki in those environments. And it's not that the Wikimedia Foundation is derelict in their duty in doing that. It's really that that's not the environment that they're deploying it. So that's the first thing I want. The second thing is that we're in the process of annual planning right now for the coming year. And one of the things that our new CPTO, Chief Product and Technology Officer, Selena, has announced is that there's a plan for this, probably in October, probably on the West Coast, a meeting to talk about MediaWiki and the future of MediaWiki, what direction it should go in. And one of the issues on the table is third-party MediaWiki. Let's have a discussion about that. An opportunity for volunteer MediaWiki developers and third parties to participate in that meeting. I don't know how many people are going to be involved, but I think it would be great to have some of that discussion at that point as well. So, and continue this. And just the third point I wanted to make was one of the areas that I think there's much room for involvement in the third-party MediaWiki community is how MediaWiki releases should be made. Right now, there's a tarball that's put out for each release. Is that the best way for us to deploy MediaWiki for third parties? I'm curious, a show of hands of the people who are in front of me. How many of you in your local installations deploy MediaWiki from the? I see 2 out of 3. And how many people deploy MediaWiki in other ways? Pulling the code from Git, using something like Ansible to deploy it. I said, you put your hand up for both of those. I saw that.
I meant to.
Yeah, okay. There are a lot of different ways to deploy the software. And I would argue that if folks are using the tarball, maybe it's because that's like the thing that is easiest for them to get, but maybe it's not actually the best way for them to get the software. I'm not sure what the best way to get the software is, but I'd be really interested to know from the people that actually are deploying wiki-based infrastructure in third-party environments. How do you want the software? And maybe y'all could somehow become more involved in the actual process of making those releases. It's not something that is or really should be a primary responsibility of the Wikimedia Foundation. It's wonderful that the foundation is making those releases available to third parties. But it's something I've wanted for a long time, is for third parties to get more actively involved in that process and perhaps even change the way that process exists.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because tarballs are really kind of like something from a previous era almost, right? Like, you download the tarball, you upload it with FTP to your shared host, and like away you go, right? Like,
No.
That's how it's done in, like, when I was a kid.
Yeah, right.
But it's not how it's done now.
Yeah, and I'd like to just kind of jump on to that point. The releases are actually a great example of the way that Wikimedia does support third parties. They don't really use them internally at all. They just deploy weekly from a rolling train. So the releases are cut just for third parties. The long-term support is kept around every 4 releases, primarily for the benefit of third-party enterprises. And that's a very good way that Wikimedia supports that, because that is not a resource-free endeavor on their end to be able to backport patches and the like. I'd say you also see support in development areas with code reviews, as well as even the MediaWiki.org site collecting all these extensions and documentation for things that benefit third parties that will never be used on Wikimedia. I'd say those are some very good ways that Wikimedia is supporting. There are also definitely ways that Wikimedia lacks support for third parties. So it's not like one particular, like they're all in or they're not all in. Different departments of Wikipedia and Wikimedia have different goals. And you see that in terms of where third-party support is strong and where it's a bit lacking.
And as a person on this panel with probably the least connection to the foundation, I have like a slightly different perspective from this. First, I want to make it clear how grateful everyone here is for the foundation in making the software publicly available as an open source software, right? And it's awesome. I mean, it literally changed my life. So who am I to, not be grateful for it? At the same time, it's important to realize that yes, the Wikimedia Foundation is not obligated to do any of this and is truly doing it out of open source software is popular for a reason, right? It provides benefits not only to those who use it, but also to those who develop it, namely in the form of additional contributions, right? And if MediaWiki weren't open source, not only would many websites be forced to use something else, but MediaWiki itself wouldn't get additional development work. So for instance, I'm not sure if many people know this, but there have been Microsoft employees who have been making contributions to the MediaWiki core and extensions code bases for several years. And this is essentially somewhat of a donation of developer time and effort from one of the largest companies in the world to MediaWiki. Not a monetary donation to the foundation, but rather enhancements to the software. And yes, I will admit that there are definitely, the point of those improvements is also to benefit Microsoft at the same time. But these changes are then backported into MediaWiki itself and can be enjoyed by everyone who uses it. So the foundation kind of faces a dilemma of how much do we want to actually support MediaWiki, the primary purpose of the foundation. But when pulling back support for it, we have to be careful here, because the more support you pull, the worse it's going to become for those third-party users and the less support that they will give. So later on in the talk, Microsoft uses MediaWiki. I'll allude to this now, but basically, we're going to enter a death spiral if we just keep pulling support. You're going to have fewer users contributing as a result of fewer usage of it. And so I think this is a path that we want to be about going down. So I don't have that much, involvement with the foundation, but what I can say is, all in all, we want to be careful about how we're going to do this moving forward.
All right, very interesting. Well, we've been talking for a little over half an hour, so we're more than halfway through. I can keep asking my silly questions, but if anybody has questions in the audience or remotely, feel free to jump in. Oh yeah, James.
So you've worked specifically in product, specifically in MediaWiki, so I think you're the perfect person for this question. But what sort of user persona development around third-party MediaWiki uses has the foundation done? Like, to what extent does the foundation comprehend third-party MediaWiki users as a customer base?
I'll just repeat the question for people watching at home. Hopefully I paraphrase this correctly, but to what extent does the foundation create personas and take into account third-party users as MediaWiki
as like
customers?
Groups of users.
Yeah, right, as MediaWiki user groups.
I guess another way of asking this question would be, do you consider third-party use cases to be one giant bucket, or do you have more nuanced thinking around it?
Okay, yeah. Do you consider third-party use cases to be one giant bucket, or do you have a more nuanced view? And for those who aren't, Cindy, should they? I guess.
I'll answer that question, I guess, two ways. The first way is that the Wikimedia Foundation is a very unique organization based upon my experience in other organizations.
Mhm.
And it is by no means homogeneous. And what I have found is that there is a huge opinion on the topic of third-party MediaWiki, whether that be should third-party MediaWiki be supported, to how, if it should be supported, how should it be supported?
Mhm.
And so there is no single persona for third-party MediaWiki that's considered,
Mhm.
because there's so many different people with so many different opinions. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've had. It was one of the challenges when I came in the door as product manager, was there was never a decision made on, do we support third-party MediaWiki? If so, how?
Mhm.
What does third-party MediaWiki mean? I'm hoping, periodically you hear we're going to have this discussion. I've heard we're going to have that discussion in the next coming fiscal year. I would like to get an answer to that question. I think we're still going to have it because of the nature of the organization. There's still going to be a diversity of opinions and a diversity of voices. But if we can get at least some sort of commitment to at least high-level answers to some of those questions, I think it would help the third-party community. I know one of the questions before I joined the foundation, when we were supporting government customers for the use of MediaWiki, one of the questions our customers often had is, what guarantee do we have that 5 years from now, MediaWiki is going to continue to exist as a software that we can base our knowledge management applications on? And the answer to that also was, none. There is no long-term commitment to it, except it's open source software. If it ceases to be supported as open source software by the Wikimedia Foundation, there's still always the opportunity for folks to fork and continue. I don't like that solution because I think there is huge benefit to working on the same code base together and having the benefits of more people contributing software. But there is always that. The other aspect, when you talked about personas of support, there was another thought I had, and it's now escaping me. But does that sort of answer your question a little bit?
It kind of, I think it gives me a sense of how much structure there is to understanding third parties, which is to say there isn't a lot.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to talk about, often within the foundation, we talk about volunteer developers.
Mhm.
There are a lot of different types of volunteer developers, and they volunteer in different ways.
And some of them aren't volunteers.
Well, some aren't volunteers. Some of them work for other companies and are contributing code, but from the perspective of the open source project, they're considered volunteer developers.
Mhm.
There are folks who contribute to core. There are folks who contribute to core because they would like to see some feature in Wikimedia projects. There are folks who contribute to core because they'd like their own MediaWiki instance to behave in a certain way.
Mhm.
There are folks who contribute to Wikimedia extensions, either because they want to affect the behavior on Wikimedia wikis or because they want to use a extension that happens to also be used by Wikimedia, but on their own wiki. There are folks who contribute to, like, many of the extensions, well, all of the extensions that I've developed and continue to maintain are those that are not Wikimedia extensions. They are not hosted on Wikimedia properties. And there are folks who continue to contribute to and maintain extensions that are outside. Then there are volunteer developers who develop tools that might be mining information from Wikimedia wikis to find information that then gets provided in other sources, or folks who are writing tools to edit Wikimedia wikis. There are volunteer developers who are writing tools that run against MediaWiki but were never intended to run against Wikimedia wikis. So there's so many different, so in your question as far as what different personas are there are a lot of different personas for third parties who contribute to the MediaWiki software ecosystem. And it's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Right.
Does anybody else want to
Sorry,
add
just
anything? Yeah.
quick question. I know Cindy mentioned the fiscal year. What is the Wikimedia Foundation's fiscal year?
July to the end of June.
Got it. Thank you.
I would just also say, that I really agree with the idea that there are more than one type of third-party user. Often third-party users are seen as just like a group that's very homogeneous, but they're actually quite different. And like earlier, we were talking about like raise your hand if you use the tarball. And in some sense, not very many people did. But also we have to keep in mind the type of people who would come to a conference like this are probably not using a tarball. Because once you have a website to a certain maturity, deploying code by unzipping a tarball and shoving it on your server is just not how it's done. But it is an easy way to get into things when you're first starting. And like those people probably don't come to this conference, but they might still exist. And then on the other hand, some people deploy with Git or fancier deploy systems. I mean, it always depends, but there's a lot of different types of users with lots of different types of needs, and third parties should not be viewed as just a single group who want to do one thing.
All right, cool. I'm looking at this laptop. Gary Foster from across the pond has a good question. I would like to see an installer like WordPress and Joomla, where when updating it is simply a click of a button. The way Joomla and WordPress do extension installs would be useful as well. It would make it more accessible for people who aren't necessarily technical. Well, it's not really a question at all. It's just.
I have thoughts.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
I have thoughts. I actually used to maintain both Joomla and WordPress sites as a volunteer for the PTAs for my kids' schools. And the first time I had to do that and I had to update something and I just pushed a button, I'm like, shoot, why can't we do this in MediaWiki? That would be so much easier. And I've had conversations with folks within the foundation about that. And I have three conclusions based on that. I was told, oh, there are security implications for that. And oh my gosh, yes, there absolutely are security, but there are security implications for Joomla and WordPress for that as well. So I do think that security needs to be considered. I don't think that that's necessarily a invalidating condition, a deal breaker for being able to do that. My second point is something that I sort of realized in sort of ruminating about this, is that if you are using MediaWiki, and let's say you go to a special page for MediaWiki that lists all the extension, and there's a button there that says upgrade the extension, and you upgrade an extension to a version of an extension that's not compatible in some subtle way, so that it was not detected before you install it, that this extension is incompatible with your MediaWiki version, and you have then broken completely your MediaWiki and if you rely just on the front end to be able to upgrade your site, you have now broken your site and broken the tool that you use in order to maintain versions. So I strongly feel that if there were, and I think it would be wonderful if there were, a front-end way for you to manage your MediaWiki installation, it really needs to be a separate software application hosted side by side with your MediaWiki instance. but not using MediaWiki, because if it's possible for you to upgrade your extension and break your installation, you need to make sure that you can still use that interface to roll back the extension to whatever you had before. So yes, I think it would be wonderful, but I think it needs to be done judiciously, both from a security perspective as well as from a site maintainability extension. But other than that, I personally am all in. I think it would be fabulous. I don't see it happening anytime soon, but maybe that application that lives beside MediaWiki that allows you to is something that third-party installs folks could build.
I'd like to add that it might not be possible for MediaWiki itself to include this, but that's one of the problems that Canasta is trying to solve. And because it's designed, around Docker, and whenever Canasta is started up, it'll run update.php every single time. That update.php script is actually quite powerful because it provides you a non-interactive way of just updating the software to run the latest database schema changes, things like that. So because Canasta runs every single time on startup, and if you pull a new version of the image whenever you want to upgrade MediaWiki, and because that update.php runs automatically, just really as simple as updating the image that you're using for that container for Canasta, and you'll be able to get that latest update without much interaction needed. Another thing is you can use the CLI to install and update Canasta. So that's a way to make things easier based on the Docker paradigm. I know that's not really a web install option, but if you really think about it, there's a lot of difficulties associated with that, and doing it like this is just the most straightforward way given the constraints that we have. And the reason why Canasta has requirements such as you have to have your own virtual machine that's capable of running Docker, that's a pretty high bar to set for people who usually are using like shared hosting, for instance. But we set that high bar because we want to, these options that are available. And basically we're saying, if you can provide this, we will give you everything else that you want. So yes, you're not going to get a web installer for updating for Canasta, but if you're okay with adapting to what Canasta does, that'll be helpful in basically making the update process easier, is what I'm trying to guess you're doing. Because people will say what they want, but not why they want it. My guess is that you want it to be easier to update, not that you necessarily need to be able to do it through the web. So for that, Canasta basically has solved that problem already.
I would just add, security concerns are kind of legitimate if you have a system where from the interface you can update the site. That means the web server has to have access to like the PHP files. It means that you have a whole bunch of other worries if the wrong user gets access. So it does make things quite a bit more complicated. But at the same time, security is always a trade-off. Viewing things as either insecure or secure is the wrong way of looking at it. You have to view if the risk is worth it. And for some users, the risk might be worth it to have an easier experience. Other users, the risk is definitely not worth it. Like Wikipedia, risk definitely not worth it. Third-party users, maybe that risk is worth it. Anyways, all I'm trying to say is, different users have different needs, and perhaps MediaWiki is flexible enough to have an optional feature. Someone would have to write it, but in theory, having it something that you have to have and is always on, that's not going to fly. But I don't see any reason in principle why MediaWiki can't have such a thing. If someone designed and built it well and made it optional, it could happen. Someone has to do it.
Not
Ryan,
really.
did you want to add anything?
No, I think the other three pretty much covered everything I would want to say.
Cool. Okay, yeah, we got a question. Oh, sorry, Rich. Yeah.
So Wikitech has, and cut me off if I say things I shouldn't, actually has an extension that adds a special page to like, hey, I want to update this extension that just runs like git pull in the server, but it's currently private. Would this be useful if this was like released publicly and it proved to meet other customers? Or because like I had considered if you use this and then it breaks, you can't use that system to undo it. So having this as an option might tempt people to do it when, if they don't know how to revert themselves with the shell, they perhaps shouldn't. So would this be helpful? Or
So sorry, briefly, the question is that there's a super secret extension that lets you call it git pull. Should this ever see the light of day? Something like that.
I'm not sure if that's how I'd paraphrase the question. So there's this extension that like can update other extensions in the background, but the question was, would that be problematic because if it breaks your wiki, it's hard to undo? I mean, I again think this is a risk versus trade-off question, although not usually included in some ways, part of security. So it is really kind of the same sort of thing. Is this risk worth the trade-off? Is the easier updating worth the risk that you could totally explode your wiki? And like most risks, it's not just stops there. There's also the question of, can you mitigate this risk? And there are probably things one could do to make it less likely. Like for not the super young people in the crowd, but I don't know if you remember in older computers, when you want to change the screen resolution, it would, I mean, maybe it still does this. I don't think it does this anymore. It would say, here's your new screen resolution. If you don't click this button, 15 seconds, we're reverting back because we're assuming your monitor is totally broken.
It still does that.
Still does that?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe my Linux computer just doesn't do that because it assumes that I'm okay with things being broken.
Windows 11 still does that. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so like you can have similar things. You could have things that automatically like test after the upgrade to see if things seem totally broken. Never going to catch everything, but enough of something to make sure that it still works enough you can hit the revert button. Like there's ways to mitigate the risk. They aren't perfect, but they can change the risk equation from being unacceptable to acceptable. So, I mean, specific, devil's always in the details, but I don't think it's impossible. I do think it can be like something you have to think carefully about.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. And another thing is this extension only updating itself, or is it updating other things as well? If it's a self-updater, you have a lot more control over that environment. You get to know whether or not it's actually more safe to do. Like if your extension doesn't have any database schema changes, you don't need to worry about pulling an update that then throws an exception because your schema is out of date. Whereas if you're updating other stuff, you can't make those guarantees. If you're updating yourself, you get to know that your extension.json is whatever version constraints are in there are relatively tested against whatever versions of MediaWiki you support. With other extensions, no guarantees there. So I'd say it really, as Brian mentioned, depends on the specifics as to whether or not something like that was safe. The other point is that's great for like deployment methodologies where somebody does just upload the tarball, uploads extension tarballs and wants to click on things to update. But if you say are managing your MediaWiki images with Canasta or other deployment methodologies where it's centrally managed, you probably don't want to expose the ability for a random user to self-update code outside of that process.
Yeah, it's important to remember that WordPress is a blog engine, right? And the assumption is that people running a WordPress bloggers and not like professional web administrators. So like professional web administrators probably don't want a one-click update. They want something that's repeatable, loggable, version controlled, and there's lots of good reasons for that and good things that come along with it, where less professional web administrators want a button they can just press. So again, different use cases for different people.
Yeah, I'll just add that two things. First of all, I love that analogy of the updating the display. I had never thought about that with respect to having this in MediaWiki, and I think that's a brilliant solution to that problem. I think that, having something where it would revert automatically if you didn't say something within X seconds, I think is a great option. But, in response to the early question of, should available, would people be interested in it? I will say that as somebody who maintains some wiki farms, I tend to play fast and loose quite often with, I'll go into the database and, delete from jobs, to clear the job queue. Tweak things directly in there periodically when I have to. Not proud of that, but occasionally it's what you need to do. If you made available an extension like that, there are folks who would use it. I would definitely mark caveats all over it, but I'm sure there would be people who would be very happy if you provided that to them as a tool.
These are excellent points, and just to finalize on this, I'm not sure if anyone here has actually used WordPress. It's okay if you're like betraying MediaWiki or whatever, but if you've tried upgrading WordPress or whatever, I don't know if anyone's tried it before, but have you guys bricked it before with the web updater? Because I have, and so I'll be quite frank, I don't really care about that concern. It's going to happen regardless of all the safeguards you put into it, as Brian said. So my opinion is just go for it. I think that sounds great. You can add some more mitigations to it, but it is going to happen. And if you go, search up like, oh no, my WordPress is in maintenance mode, how do I get it unstuck? There's it's very commonly.
Backups are for.
Yeah, that's a very commonly asked, question on Google. So it is going to happen. Things will happen, but instead of saying, oh, because this is going to happen, we should just avoid it, I say, no, just go for it. Hope for the best. If it doesn't, then go Google it or ChatGPT it. Or
As we
FaceChat
say
it.
in the industry, accept the risk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's got to be one with the risk, So, yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, that's the perfect time. It's been an hour. Thank you to all of our panelists. It was great. What's next?
Could you unshare that?